Okay, so today we're going to talk about qualitative research, what it is and how we can help. Welcome to those of you who are online. Is there a camera or is it just audio?
It's just the audio.
It's just audio?
Yeah.
Great to have you here. We really appreciate you connecting in today, and also those of us here in the room, where we're going to be focused on qualitative research, what it is and how we can help. My name is Alex Clark, and I work with the International Institute for Qualitative Methodology as board chair. And I'm here with my colleague who will introduce herself later on, Bailey Sousa, who's the director of the International Institute for Qualitative Methodology at the university. And we at IIQM are the main provider internationally of training, of workshops and education for qualitative research for academics in the world. Thinking about what qualitative research is, some of you will be familiar with it, some of you may not be. We know currently in the world, we're quite conscious of difference, perhaps more than what we were 2 or 3 years ago. For example, the recent US election, the Brexit votes, and it's really brought to a fore issues of perceptions, issues of how we see and understand other groups, and sometimes also not understanding where each other's coming from. We're also aware in many realms of social interaction that social interactions used to be physical, but increasingly now social interactions happen in an online space. And how we represent entities like cancer not only exist in physical cultural spaces, but they also exist in online spaces as well. And qualitative research can help us understand more about these online spaces and online representations. Focus here tends to be on the individual, but of course we're not just individuals, we're also groups as well. And qualitative research can help us understand elements of culture, elements of how groups function, perceive and interact together, not at the individual level, but at that more collective level. So, taking all this into account, what we're going to focus on today? Well, first of all, we're going to focus on what qualitative research is. Then we're going to focus on some key concepts, particularly what is the approach that's called simple, what's the approach that's called complicated and complex, before focusing a little bit more detail on what qualitative methods can do, and finally, how IIQM can help you. So first of all, when we say qualitative research, what do we mean? We hear this word bandied about a lot. What does that actually mean? Well, strictly speaking, qualitative research is research that uses non-numerical data, as opposed to quantitative research, which uses numerical data. And historically, the sense of non-numerical data most often meant textual data. But of course, in the world today of video, of audio, of augmented reality as well, increasingly qualitative research goes beyond that textual space to refer to the visual, the audio-visual space as well. And in this way, qualitative research isn't just about describing the world, it's about reaching deeper, to a deeper level of abstraction and understanding than mere description can provide. Qualitative research is not about interventions, though it can help us understand why interventions work and why they don't work better, particularly as part of mixed methods designs. Qualitative research is not about prediction, but it can help us understand why things do and do not happen in the world. Why in some cultures we see racism and sexism and certain types of behaviors we don't want to see, say, in an organization, whereas in other organizations we don't see those behaviors as prominently. And qualitative research can help us understand why these things happen. Thinking of qualitative research as falling into different groups then with this broad sense in mind, qualitative research can help us focus on and understand more about the perspectives of individuals, usually focusing on more depth in a smaller number of people. Qualitative research can help us understand differences and similarities between different social groups. And finally, qualitative research can help us understand why people see, act, behave differently. And this third type of qualitative research, which is also associated with survey, is quite contentious for qualitative researchers, some of whom would say qualitative research and survey is not proper qualitative research, even though it is non-numerical data, because the questions asked are closed, the phraseology is the same, and the questions ultimately are structured. Whereas if we take a very concept-driven view of qualitative research, we would see this survey-based qualitative research as being proper qualitative research. Okay, so let's think about some key concepts here. Key concepts associated with life and ontology. And we're going to think here of three different concepts: the simple, the complicated, and the complex. So first of all, what is complexity? When we hear that word bandied about, what does it actually mean? And often we use that word interchangeably with other words, particularly the word complicated. And our argument is that you cannot do that the complicated and the complex are in fact different. And both of those are different than the simple. So what does it mean in a social system when things are simple? Well, when things are simple, kind of like following a recipe. When you do certain things, you're highly likely, almost inevitably, to get the outcome you are looking for. Much like following a recipe or an algorithm. If I want to be seen as more accessible in my culture, I have a more prominent, visible offer. Simple steps leading to a simple outcome. And those of us who do social research would say, well, that's nice and easy to understand, but does it actually represent reality? Because often one can do that and we get the opposite outcome that we expected. Why? Because reality is not simple. And some groups who advocate for alternatives to this would say, well, reality is not simple but complicated. Reality is complicated when formula can be applied, when we can identify everything that's important, when we can quantify it, build it into our equations, draw on historical precedent and methodological and substantive expertise, and be highly likely when we do that to get the outcome we expect. Putting a rocket into space successfully is complicated. It's indeed rocket science. But we're highly likely to be successful when we have everything in the formula. And some researchers apply this approach to social events like injuries, or social events like phenomena, trying to find which parts are missing and they don't know about, and filling in those gaps in their formula, with the hope that by filling in those gaps, they are then highly likely to be successful in predicting and changing the phenomena that they're interested in. But many social researchers would say you cannot apply this complicated model to reality. Why? Because reality is not complicated. Reality is complex. And when systems are complex, this means that there are so many things going on, some of which we know about, but many things we may not even know about, that are influential. And those things interact and connect and synergize with each other. And historical precedents and historical expertise have limited application here because every situation is unique. In contrast to putting rocket into space, bringing up children is complex. You do the same thing with one child and the other, and you get a very, very different outcome. Why? Because reality is complex. It's not complicated, it's not simple, it's complex. So thinking of the difference conceptually between these two concepts of the complicated, that requires formula and expertise, can draw precedents and experience, versus what's complex, where formula have limited application, many factors are involved, past experience provides limited assurance of future success, because situations are unique. We can start to use those terms more specifically and more aptly in different situations. And very much qualitative research positions itself within this complex ontology that questions quantification, that looks at how factors interact, and looks at uniqueness in situations. I'm going to talk about here a paper about what football or soccer can teach us about this complexity, published in the BMJ in 2012. And the question in this paper was, okay, if we care about goals scored, if we think about that as our most important outcome. Who would you rather have on your soccer team? Lionel Messi or Alex Clark? Now, I don't know what you would think. Who would you rather have on your team?
Is your goal to win the game?
Your goal is to win the game and score the most goals. You can be honest. Maybe Messi? Okay. Yeah. And usually when we're out and about, we ask people this. Sometimes it's been the whole room who've said, oh, they'd rather have Lionel Messi on their team than myself. What would be your reason for that answer?
To increase the probability of winning.
Why would Lionel Messi do this?
Because he's known to be good in the sport.
Yes. How do you know that?
Media.
Okay, so you see evidence of that. You see video.
No, I don't watch soccer.
Okay. You see the newspaper or the internet.
Sure.
Okay, so you read about it. Okay, so yes, often Lionel Messi, and of course Lionel Messi plays for Barcelona. He's won Best World Player of the Year, the Ballon d'Or, I think it's 4 times, as much as any other player, apart from Cristiano Ronaldo, who's also won it 4 times. Whereas me, maybe I'm a little bit different. But I'd like to put it to you that actually we are very similar, and I'll explain why. We have 2 legs and 2 feet. We both have brown mousy hair. We're both under 6 foot tall. In terms of social status, we're both in our top income decile in our respective countries, and we score goals regularly. Henceforth, I put it to you that we are in fact like 2 peas in a pod. So, I have persuaded you.
You've made a good argument.
Okay. You're being very kind. Why would this not persuade you?
There's contextual factors that are
Such as?
Presumably you're scoring goals in a different league than this other gentleman.
Against my children?
Against your children?
Yes.
There you go.
They are not quite strong enough. So there's contextual factors that come into it there. Any other reasons? You were saying I play in a different sphere. Do I play in a professional league? No. Whereas Messi is doing this absolutely in a professional league. Any other reasons?
Well,
The characteristics that you're outlining here probably aren't the key ones that are going to predict your outcomes that you're looking at.
Yes. So even though these things are relatively easy to measure, 2 arms and 2 feet, they're not necessarily the right things to measure. They're not necessarily the right factors to explain a difference in an outcome. Yeah. So whilst it's easy to measure, ontologically, in terms of causality, not necessarily important. Absolutely. And this is an issue of ontology. It's about what matters more and what matters most in a complex system, and thinking about distinguishing those things. And sometimes in our quantitative work, perhaps things that are easy to measure aren't the things that are most ontologically important. Perhaps those things that are ontologically important aren't even measurable, or at least we've not even developed measures for them yet. Perhaps we don't even know if they exist. Also, in terms of this complex ontology, how do we know what's most important? How can we ascribe differences? On what basis can we ascribe differences in one factor to another factor? How does elements of context influence outcomes? So, for example, even in soccer, there'll be some players in a big game that would play above themselves in their normal skill levels, and there would be some that would be overawed, and then they would kind of freeze. Lionel Messi has never actually done that well at international level. Some players play better at international level. How does context influence the outcomes that are important? How can we measure what's most important, even if we can make a case for it being important? And then also, how do parts interact? So if we think of Messi in a broader soccer team, do the other players get threatened by Messi, or are they pleased to have Messi in their team? And then they all play out. Sometimes if you were to play Messi and Ronaldo in the same team, perhaps neither would play as well. So recognizing that the parts, how the parts interact and also change over time is also important here. This has relevance for how we think about interventions. Whilst goal is our outcome, often in our intervention work we have outcomes as well, and we pose this question of whether interventions work. And I would say to you, this is almost a simple ontology expressed here. And this is akin to saying, do Manchester United win? Or do the Vancouver Canucks win? Or do the Edmonton Oilers win? Well, against whom? In what context and at what time? But so often in our clinical discourses, we're framing the argument in terms of whether interventions work or not. A question and an ontology that I think is absolutely flawed. Just as it's flawed to ask, it makes no sense to ask this question. Does a team win? Because it all depends. And we need to bring that complex lens that adds nuance to this, to our research as well as to our understanding of sport. If you're interested in reading more about that paper, Christmas 2012 edition of the BMJ, written by myself, What Football Teaches Us About Researching Complex Interventions. So this brings us to what qualitative methods are for. Thinking about this complexity lens, thinking about this ontology, and then thinking about how we can use qualitative methods in the world to help our research studies in the different disciplines that we work in. Qualitative research can firstly help address how people view and experience the world. I'll talk a little bit about my own research here in relation to heart failure. Heart failure is the end stage of heart disease, whereby the heart can't meet the demands of the body. And there are some wonderful disease management programs evaluated over the last 22 years from randomized trials that said these collections of interventions that provided complex support for people with heart failure were effective, that we had randomized trials that suggested they worked. And those in the field suggested this was kind of the end of the story, that the interventions worked. However, we spent some time looking at these interventions and actually found the findings were quite inconsistent. And we wrote this up in a number of papers, this paper in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, where we problematized that these interventions, heart failure disease management programs, actually worked. And we proposed in other papers that they've been championed on the basis of limited quality evidence. And actually what was needed for the future of heart failure disease management programs was both quant and qual work that should be used to improve understanding of the effect on outcomes of program mechanisms and context, bringing a complexity lens in to this work that had been approached in quite a simple way thus far. Qualitative research can secondly help us understand particular needs and problems that client groups, communities, and individual patients have. And if you look at heart failure self-care in more detail, it's really interesting. Somebody has heart failure for self-care, they'll need to take their medications each day. And someone with heart failure will take 10 to 25 medicines a day. They will also be encouraged to be physically active, to have good mental health, to restrict their intake of fluid, to restrict their intake of salt, and to restrict their intake of alcohol. And all the while, whilst doing this, they also, because of their heart failure, tend to have deficits in cognitive function. So heart failure self-care is multifaceted and not easy. It's challenging for people to do, and they're doing this not in hospitals, not while being helped by health professionals. They're doing this in their own home, in their own days, trying to hold it all together. And one of the reasons why we posit that the trials of heart failure disease management programs to improve self-care didn't work is because so few of those trials looked at what was important to patients and what their experiences of were about self-care. And there were about 60 to 70 trials done. Not one of those trials, before they started to intervene to support self-care, were based on qualitative research about what self-care was and how did patients practice it. We had, if you liked, invented solutions when we didn't understand the problem. And then we wonder why the findings in the trials are inconsistent. I would say that's entirely not surprising. So we did this qualitative systematic review that was published in Heart, looking at the determinants of effective heart failure self-care. And when we did this and we reviewed 49 different qualitative studies, we identified that self-care would be more effective when supported by interventions that included patients and caregivers in consultations. What was interesting was just about all the trials focused on patients only, but patients consistently said they managed their heart failure with their partner. Day in, day out, their partner was helping them, prompting them, supporting them to manage their heart failure, but they were then excluded from healthcare consultations. Ironically. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, eh? They wanted approaches that sought first to understand their needs and where they were coming from. They also had lots of beliefs that were in contrary to health evidence. They would say, oh, you know, I don't think I've got heart failure and I don't think my tablets really help me. But they didn't feel that those beliefs were heard, and the health professionals they worked with didn't try to work with those beliefs. They were focused very much on a telling mode. And so the information was very much in contrast and in conflict with the beliefs that the patients and the caregivers had. They wanted approaches that integrated their values and experiences and aspirations with those of the guidelines and those of the clinicians' suggestions. Clinicians also can work to foster the daily reliance that the patients had on symptom monitoring. Not one of these trials focused on encouraging patients to weigh themselves often. However, this is one of the most important things and useful things you can do for heart failure self-care, but it's seldom often done by patients in the qualitative studies. In the qualitative studies, the patients would report on their subjective feelings, but very few of them weighed themselves once or twice a day. But ultimately, patients use lots of cues in their environments, lots of their routines to help them self-care effectively, but the health professionals were not presenting advice that responded to those cues and routines. It was a lot easier for patients to remember to take their medicines when they did it at the same time each day, such as when they're having their cup of coffee in the morning. But that wasn't a suggestion in terms of timing that the health professionals were presenting. And even simple things like using pill boxes, cheap, minimal harms, very easy to do. Again, this was not being suggested by the health professionals. If you're interested in more in this qualitative review, there's a podcast on it on the BMJ website on the determinants of effective heart failure self-care. Thirdly, qualitative research can focus on explaining behaviors or outcomes. Why are some people physically active during heart failure? Why are some people not? Why do some people take their medicines and some people not? Work that we've looked at in relation to heart failure management programs at home and looking at the complexities of it. Also, seeing heart failure self-care as something that's not just about individuals and agency, but also about context. Seeing heart failure self-care as a behavior that exists within a particular context. And we've done work, for example, to look at qualitative research and why context matters in relation to an individual behavior like heart failure self-care and how we can be more responsive to it as health professionals. And we can think of these things as quite alien, but when we look at lots of health behaviors, smoking is a very good example, these behaviors tend to be very context specific. And historically, we may have said, oh, people who smoke, they need to know the risks better. And by doing so, they'll be less likely to smoke. But of course, qualitative research shows that smoking is not just about knowing the risks or not knowing the risks. Smoking is influenced by the physical display of cigarettes, the social norms associated with tobacco consumption, the cultural context in which tobacco consumption happens within individual settings and communities. And you've seen this historically sometimes in terms of advertising around tobacco. If you go back to the 1930s, the gendered nature of tobacco, where tobacco companies wanted more women to smoke, and they would exploit children and babies and representations in order to encourage more women to smoke. And as research into the health harming effects of cigarettes became more prominent, The tobacco companies, for example, would use physicians and representations of physicians to try and persuade and create a social norm that tobacco consumption actually wasn't health harming. And even Santa Claus, indeed, was represented in terms of the advertising to normalize cigarettes. These things can seem very different, but nevertheless, cultural conceptions of tobacco are all around us today. These are all images from movies and culture over the last couple of years. And it's interesting to what degree cigarettes, tobacco consumption is curiously visible in these cultural artifacts. So, penultimately, the concept of, I don't know if you've heard this before, verisimilitude. Verisimilitude refers to resonance. Good qualitative research should seek that resonance with you. It's that aha moment you get when you read a book or a novel or you see a movie where the research really speaks to you. Any of you seen the film Dunkirk, which gives you a real sense, the phenomenology there, of what it was like to be a soldier in that menacing, threatening, uncertain place, and very, very unsettling. And that feeling of unsettlement you had was the verisimilitude of that movie, that it spoke to you, that it influenced you. And you can look at this using qualitative research also in relation to illness, such as what we did in social science and medicine, looking at the influence of rural work and place in Alberta around the effects of managing heart failure within that very rural setting. Qualitative research can also seek to elicit emotion, to make us feel and care and emote about things without having to experience those things directly. I don't know about you, but I don't want to experience a heart attack in order to know what a heart attack is like. But as an alternative to that, I can read qualitative research, like this paper that we did in Journal of Clinical Nursing, about what it's like for other people to have heart attacks. The language that they use, the emotions that they convey, that existential sense of what it's like, and that can improve my insight. And when I can approach that work with empathy and understanding and openness, and understand a little bit more about what that unique human experience is like, and bring that to my own clinical practice. And qualitative research finally should tell a good story, particularly narrative work. We want to create a sense of story. We want to create a sense of connection with our qualitative work so that we can take complex processes like, for example, health seeking during heart failure, a multifaceted complex process extending over time, and tell a story about what that process is like. To connect it, to foster communication, understanding about the complexities of that process, with a view to perhaps developing interventions and interactions that can help patients, for example, seek help quicker. So that's what qualitative research can do. Often qualitative research is used in combination with quantitative research now, with mixed methods philosophies. How do we collect qualitative data? Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. We can do interviews. This historically has been the most kind of common form used widely of qualitative research. We can do things like focus groups, where we can develop larger volumes of qualitative data with larger groups of people fairly quickly. And more recently, we can do observational work, where we watch what people do. We don't only focus on what they say they do. These are very much physical entities, but we have visual types of qualitative research now, like photo voice and photo elicitation as well. And the online space, where we can be interested in the cultural meaning and the discourses that we see enacted on social media. Blogs, Facebook postings, tweets, and also in relation to chat rooms. So the places of qualitative data continue to expand and change over time. In relation to all this work, just before I close, where is quality? What makes good qualitative research and bad qualitative research? Well, like many areas of research, you can do a checklist, and you can see if the researchers have followed all the things in their checklist. But there's also a kind of artistry around qualitative research that defies a checklist. So if you think of this picture by Van Gogh, and you think of a checklist way of thinking about the picture versus, well, does the picture speak to me? How does it make me feel? Does it make me understand or realize or see something in a way I haven't before? Kind of like a piece of music can sometimes take you to a different place. And this reflects debates in qualitative research that would say, well, quality is about comprehensiveness, it's about following steps, and it's about a form of neatness and precision and process. So this is a good qualitative representation, for example, of a house versus an alternative view of qualitative rigor that's far more about, does this speak to me? Does it allow me to see something in a different way? That defies technical proficiency and has more a place in artistry. And those debates will continue to go on, but for us it's important to know that those debates around quality also exist. So that's qualitative research, that's how data is collected, that's why it's collected, and that's a little bit about the complexities that qualitative research seeks to explore. Now I will pass over to my colleague, Bailey Sousa, the director of IIQM.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to have everyone here today in the room and online. It was a great overview of what qualitative research is, and now thinking about who IIQM is and how we can help. And IIQM is so excited to be celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We're an international interdisciplinary institute that's based at the University of Alberta, but we're here for everyone across the world who's interested in qualitative methods, interested in doing them, becoming more involved. And really, IIQM focuses on 4 main areas. The first is advancing knowledge, both the dissemination of knowledge and the exchange of knowledge, creating spaces and places for scholarly growth, building and developing networks, and finally, supporting research. And we do that mostly through skills development. But overall, like I say, IIQM is here for all of our members and the people who are looking to further their knowledge around qualitative methods, and also supporting how we can, from students, undergraduate students, graduate students, right through to people later in their career who are looking at how they can get more involved using qualitative methods in their research, or mixed methods, as Alex mentioned. So one of the ways that we do this for our early students is by offering the IIQM Dissertation Award. This is a great early way in your career to get involved with IIQM. It's if you've recently completed your dissertation at the master's level or PhD level, you can submit that. And there's great prizes. You're able to come to present your research at one of our conferences. And that's available each year. And the applications for that are open in October. But how can you get involved now? So there's a number of ways to do that. As I said, we're supporting skills development, and we do that throughout the world. So if you're traveling far, you can join us at one of our Thinking Qualitatively Traveling Workshop series. This year we're hosting those in February in both Melbourne and Canberra. But for most of us, we're looking at what are the things that are taking place closer to home. And our Qualitative Methods Conference this year is taking place in Banff, which is just around the corner from you. And that's May 1st to 3rd. And this is this conference is interdisciplinary, so focusing on methods from all disciplines, which is different than our other main conference that we offer each year in October, which is the Qualitative Health Research Conference, which has a health focus. So for this conference, any discipline, the theme this year is Qualitative Methods in a Time of Change, 3 international wonderful keynote speakers, and a great opportunity to present your work and meet other qualitative researchers. The Qualitative Health Research Conference that I spoke about for October this year will be held in Halifax. And actually part of the reason that we're in Vancouver today is looking at locations for 2019, where we'll be hosting the Qualitative Health Research Conference here in Vancouver, which is very exciting. Also each year, IIQM offers the Thinking Qualitatively Workshop Series. This takes place in Edmonton, and it's 7 days of intensive workshops that you can attend, all 7 or 1 or 2. And we start off with qualitative software workshops on the weekend, and then launch into over 40 different workshops on all types of qualitative methods and also other types of academic skills development. So grant writing, publication, those types of workshops, a lot with mixed methods as well. And this year, for the first time, we'll also be hosting a conference right in the middle of that workshop, together with the International Collaboration for Participatory Health Research. And that's going to be a great way for you to be able to have an opportunity to present your work while also participating in a lot of great workshops throughout the week. If you aren't able to attend any of IIQM's events live, we offer free monthly webinars. We have 2 series, the Qualitative Methods Masterclass webinar series and also the Mixed Methods webinar series. And newly, we're also offering a webinar series in Spanish. So those, as I say, are free. You can visit our website, join each month, and all of the previous webinars are also archived. So if you're interested in any area, I'm sure there's a past webinar that you could find there. And if you want to join and be even more involved with IIQM, you can become a member. This is really demonstrating your affiliation with IIQM, and it's a great way for us to engage more with you. And really, this is a global qualitative community, and we want you to be part of that with us. IIQM also has a journal. It's the International Journal of Qualitative Methods. It's published by SAGE. Alex used to be the editor-in-chief, so if anyone has any questions about that after the session today, we're happy to answer. But this is a great place to publish your methods papers. And if you ever have a question about what a good fit is for the journal, or if you're interested in becoming a reviewer, we're looking for reviewers and submissions ongoing. So finally, this is our information. We're always here and open to questions and feedback. As I said, IIQM is here for you. We're always able to link you with other colleagues who are doing work in your same field, or if you're interested in a certain methodological approach that you need to be linked with a person doing that somewhere else, we can do that. So just send us an email, be in touch, and we'd be happy to do that as well. And if you have any questions from today, please let us know.